Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Rules and City Government Committee to order. Welcome. Roll call. For the record, Alderman Arnett and Alderman Chandemeyer are here, present and accounted for, and we're joined by Alderwoman Tierney. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Chair, I move we approve the agenda with the exception of moving 32-22 to the beginning of the agenda.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Approval of the minutes from the July 1st meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Before we get into the actual meeting items, we'd like to take a point of personal privilege to recognize one of our colleagues, a supporter of the council, actually, who's leaving us as of today. Takia is going on to bigger and better things, she thinks. We think this is bigger and better too, but you know. So, Ms. Green, can you leave the switchboard for a moment or the computer and join me at the front table?
The front table.
She's threatening me. I just want you all to hear that.
Speech.
As I mentioned, Ms. Green has served the council well for how many years? 5 years. We have one support staff for all 8 of us. Can you imagine? And it's fun. It's fun, she says. And we all rely very heavily on Takia, and we're very sad to see her go. But we're not going to hold that against you because we want you to rise. And so I'd like to present to you the City Council citation, and I'll read it. On behalf of the residents of the City of Annapolis, we're pleased to confer upon you the City Council citation in recognition of your 14 years of working with the City of Annapolis. Thank you for your service. You are first and foremost one of the funniest people we get to work with. But you're also always in tune with what is going on. In City Council and standing committee meetings, when other city staff, law office personnel, and elected members of the council don't seem to know what's going on, you're the one who keeps us straight. During the early years of COVID, you were a trusted team player, quickly getting up to speed on the ins and outs of virtual meetings, always eager to learn and work through problems. While you were off to greener pastures in your professional career, we know you can lean on the lessons learned during your tenure in the city. And if all these fail, we know you have learned important life lessons from Arnold, Helga, Gerald, Harold, Brainy, Grandpa, and the others. Presented to Takia Green, this 12th day of, this would be the 16th day of September. We missed you the other night at the meeting.
Oh, that's right.
Signed by all 8 members of the City Council.
Thank you.
So, good luck to you. Would you like to say a few words?
Julian, I know that last line came from you, and I know he's listening. But thank you all. I appreciate everything. As I said before, I learned so much from everyone here, including my first boss when I first came to the city, Mike Malinoff, and I appreciate that very much. And my second boss, who's also a prodigy of Mike, and it shows. Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to You're lucky you weren't here on Monday night. Okay, the next item on our agenda is appointments and reappointments. The first is AP 62-22, the appointment of Lynn Farrow to the Arts and Public Places Commission. Ms. Farrow, are you in the audience? I know you are.
Who is this person?
I don't know, a stranger to the city, I believe.
I'm not going to pretend I don't know you.
Yeah, would you move the mic over? Sorry. Welcome back to the city. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in art and public places.
Okay, good afternoon, members of the council and everyone gathered here. My name is Lynn Farrow. I am a resident of the city of Annapolis. I have lived in Annapolis proper now since 2013 in the city. And outside the city, I moved here in 2005 and lived in the Bay Highlands, Highland Beach area. So I've been in Annapolis for almost 20 years, and I love this place, and it has become my new hometown. And I love art and of course the art in public places, and have worked for the city several times, twice actually, under Mayor Buckley and then under Mayor Cohen as the grants coordinator, and then most recently as assistant city manager in the Buckley administration. I currently now run a consulting firm called Community Impact Partners, and we work with government entities and nonprofit organizations, mostly on strategic planning, organizational development. We do some grant writing, and that's how I keep myself busy these days. So I don't know if you all have any questions for me. What I'll say is the arts are important to me and have been important to me my entire life. I started taking ballet at about 2.5 years old and danced until I was 16. So it was an integral part of my upbringing. I integrated the dance company at the University of North Carolina in 1968. I was its first African-American student. And of course, one of the youngest students ever in that school as well. So I'm so excited to be on Art in Public Places. It is a passion of mine, and I'm delighted. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Farrow? Alderman Arnett?
Well, again, welcome back. With all of your experience and qualifications, you did answer, but with all of our vacancies and your qualifications, it seems like you had the pick of whatever board or commission you wanted to be on. So clearly, arts and public places must really be preeminent for you.
And I was invited, so the chair made me aware of the vacancy. So maybe some more of your chairs need to make other folks aware. But yes, so I would say the chairs of the boards and commissions start recruiting members. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Alderman Shannon?
So we've all worked with you for a while and known you for a while. So we've seen your work firsthand. I think you'd be fantastic in this position. So unless anyone else has other questions or comments?
Go ahead.
I'm going to make a favorable recommendation.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of giving Ms. Farrow a favorable recommendation to an appointment to Art in Public Places?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and your nomination will go before the full council, I think, on Monday night.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next appointment is Mr. Robert Hector III to the Board of Appeals. Would you step up, please? Good afternoon. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in the Board of Appeals.
My name is Robert Hector III. I've been a resident of Annapolis, Maryland since 1996 when I retired from the Army.
Mr. Hector, I apologize for interrupting. Could you turn your microphone on, please?
I apologize for that.
Thank you, sir.
I've been a resident of Annapolis, Maryland since 1996, since retired from the Army. I got involved with Mayor Buckley's becoming a mayor, and we collaborated together. I currently work at United Rentals, where I'm a branch manager. I've been there for 23 years, and he asked me a couple of opinions that I had, and he asked me to be a member of the board.
Great. The Board of Appeals, what's your interest in that aspect of city government?
Just making sure the right decision is made.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions of me?
I'm sorry,
Any more questions of me?
I don't know. Alderman Arnett?
Thank you. So currently, the Board of Appeals is made up of all attorneys. One exception is a person who has many years of experience in commercial real estate. And of course, the matters that they handle are very highly legal. I'm kind of looking at your resume and wondering what it is how you will deal in that milieu with those kinds of professionals.
Well, right now, like I said, I'm currently employed with United Rentals. I started out there as a driver in 1999. I'm now a branch manager. I have been involved in the construction business for the last 23 years. I know the ins and outs of zoning, what type of equipment is used, and what legality it is if something gets messed up on a construction site.
Thank you. Good answer.
Alderman Chennemeyer?
Yeah, do you have any goals or things you would like to see or directions you'd like the Board of Appeals to go in?
No, I just want to be a part of it.
All right, fine enough for me. Anyone else got something?
No, would you like to make a motion?
Favorable recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Well, congratulations, and your appointment will go before the full council on Monday night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and our last appointment is Mr. Philip Chambers to the Ethics Commission. Good afternoon, Mr. Chambers. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are interested in the Ethics Commission?
Well, my name is Philip Chambers. I'm the nephew of the gentleman from the
Microphone, please.
named after.
Could you check to make sure your mic is on?
That's when I.
I can't. Is it on, Takia?
Now,
Yep.
I'm the nephew of the gentleman who this woman's named after. I've been living in Annapolis all my life. I've seen it grow and change. I've seen some of the good, some of the bad. I'd like to be a contributor to increase how Annapolis is growing, and I'm also a big fan of education, and through the ethics and through their the rulings, I think I could help to get young people, which is my which I'm kind of special about or favorite about. I'm a school crossing guard at Tyler Heights Elementary. I have to get ready to go in a few minutes, get my babies across the street anyway. I was a manager at Duron Paint Company for about 25, 30 years. I was manager of the year 3 times. It was over $1 million store. I've managed and set up rules and regulations for the different departments there. I've been a baseball coach. I've been a football coach. And with all of those type things, there are certain standards and qualifications and rules and whatnot that you must follow.
Well, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the Ethics Commission, you will be called upon to make judgments about not only actual ethical violations, but the appearance, potential appearance of violation. I assume you're familiar with that kind of work, and that's something you're interested in doing.
Right.
Thank you.
One of my biggest stickers is the lights or the crossings out there on West Street. My store was there. I've seen many accidents and many people killed there, and I want to rectify that especially.
Alderman Channelmar, question?
I have no questions.
I will entertain a motion
Favorable recommendation.
Second.
to up on the agenda, and I'd like to go to that item now. 032, Human Resources Exempt Services Salary for the purpose of modifying the Assistant City Manager position salary, creating a new Special Projects at Arts Administration position, and changing the number of days that temporary employees shall be employed. Thank you. Could you identify yourselves? We don't know who you all are.
Yes. Madam Chair, my name is Michael Malinoff, the City Manager.
Kate Pettit, Chief of Staff to Mayor Buckley.
And thank you for moving the agenda item up. I appreciate it. I am here for the Assistant City Manager reclassification position. By way of background, the job description before you is one my predecessor had been working on while he was the city manager, and Tricia Hopkins, who's the director of, or they call it the chief of human resources now, and I had gone over the job description, and it was quite suitable for what we're looking for here. The real reason for the change and the reclassification is to try to be able to hire somebody who is the salary is comparable to other communities. HR has done a review of salaries both in the city manager's position and the assistant's position, and they are lower than comparable communities. Secondly, and perhaps equally, if not more important, is to enable us to hire someone who is very well qualified that I would really enjoy working with and mentoring and training to step into the position. I, in spite of rumors to the contrary, am not going to be here forever. And I think it's really behooves us to be able to bring people along and have them ready for your service to this community. I really enjoy that aspect of the job. Takia mentioned it earlier, but that is the most satisfying part of my work is hiring people, working with them, and mentoring them. And I think this will be very important in enabling us to bring someone in that will be able to be a city manager. Right now, and this is also very important to me personally, because right now as I had to tell the city attorney the other day, I'm down 50% of my staffing as we were trying to figure out who was going to write staff reports. And it's very important that we are able to hire a very qualified person and also get someone into the position, because it's a exceedingly busy job. And that's really it in summary.
Thank you. Questions? Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm trying to figure out from the title, Special Project / Arts Administrator, we don't have the position description. So could you elaborate a little bit about what that means?
Yes, absolutely, Alderman Arnett. So this is a new position that has been, we've developed the criteria and the position description after merging an existing position with a vacant position in the Mayor's office. There used to be an arts liaison in the Mayor's office, and now that position has been merged with a business liaison position that has existed since the Mayor's first term. And this brings it, the idea is to bring it into line with the other roles in the Mayor's office. So the position description specifies that this role is somebody who provides liaison to the business community and represents their issues to the Mayor and coordinates communication on behalf of the Mayor, and who also serves as the arts liaison.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
So it's a current position. The position is actually staffed. It's not a new position per se. The position is actually staffed as a contract position at the moment, and it's, currently occupied by Mr. Kalin in the Mayor's office. There was an arts liaison position that has been kind of vacant for some time. He's been performing that role unofficially, and so this reworking of the position aligns those two, sets out a clear duty statement for him with those two areas of responsibility. And this position was approved in the budget, so it's been budgeted for this year. Yeah, so that's the background.
My next question was going to be. So I see that in the fiscal impact statement.
Yeah.
This would be an increase in the number of staff in the Mayor's office?
No.
No. Thank you.
Alderman Chattermore?
I have no questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I do have a question. The current position, is that a 10 now? Is that, because you just said it would...
It was a contract position.
It's a contract position.
Yes, that's right. So now this will become an exempt service position, which our HR manager classified at that level.
Okay. And the job description, and I'm not sure we really had a job description for the initial position, but how do the responsibilities get doled out, divvied up, however?
Yes.
So that all the things that person was doing are being covered by this new position?
Yes. I don't have a current version of the position description for the position as it currently stands as a contract. There are old position descriptions. And so what we've tried to do as we've prepared for this is work through those and bring together the two primary areas of responsibility. So the current position description essentially outlines two arms of responsibility: liaise with the business community, be their voice, be their constituent voice. As you know, in the Mayor's office, we have constituent services. So this specialises that service and so again, it's a liaison position to our arts community and facilitates communication with the Mayor's office on any issues, primarily with our Arts in Public Places Commission.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Move to give a favorable recommendation.
Second.
Okay, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of giving a favorable recommendation for O3222, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank thank you all for indulging us and allowing us to come earlier. I did fail to mention that Trisha Hopkins, our HR manager, is also hiking the Camino right now. So what we're going to do is put our ideas together and lead a council retreat on the Camino. So, but I did want to mention to you that she's doing that hike right now too, and that's why she's not here.
Preparing to take us.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, committee presentations. ID 153-22, presentation, club public event permit. Mr. Lyles.
Yes, ma'am. Mike Lyles, city attorney. I apologize that the ABC board representatives are not here, but as counsel and legal advice for the board, if they were here, they would present this as follows. This is really a regulatory change they want to make to the Alcohol Beverage Control Board regulations and rules. Basically, the rules, as set before you in the memo that I provided to you earlier, has a rule that gives a certain number of club public events per year at 4. However, the state law, Maryland Annotated Code Article AB 10-1104, has a approval up to 12 events for alcoholic beverage control boards, and the 4 events was not in line with the state. So the rule change is basically to refer to and reflect that the state 12 is what the local ABC would use as its benchmark. So if the state law changes to 18 or 10 or 9 or whatever, the regulation locally would change in accordance therewith. So that's basically all this is, going from 4 to whatever the state says. And currently the state has 12 for clubs, and we're noticing that clubs are coming back for, additional repeat events. And so the board was considering moving beyond just the 4 because we have so many clubs and they want to do various events.
Thank you, Mr. Lyles. Any questions? Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this ancillary piece of information that you've given us, which has a bold letter for new language and then strikeout. I couldn't help but notice in the strikeout that it says during which the general public may be invited. Is it the case now that the general public will not have the ability to opine on the special event?
Well, the general public means that this refers to clubs and organizations that want to have public events where the public is invited, not just a club-specific or membership-specific event. So
This
it governs
a
all
hearing
events.
before the ABCB about getting permits for events, correct?
Public events, yes.
Right, and so am I construing by the strikeout that when that hearing is held before the ABCB, the general public will not be able to opine?
Apply?
Opine, be able to
The public can
provide
come to
testimony.
any ABC board meeting that they want to.
So this strikeout doesn't take away the ability for public testimony?
No, surely.
Okay, all right. That settles that confusion. Thank you.
Alderman Schneidermeyer, do you have a question?
No questions, Madam Chair?
I think this change will greatly benefit our clubs. I know Peerless, the American Legion, both struggled with keeping 4 events a year. And so this gives them greater flexibility in using their facility for general public purposes. So I think this is a great change and a great benefit for us. So I will entertain a motion.
Well, I guess the question is, if we take no action, this becomes code, right?
That's right. I'm sorry. This is not, this is
Yes.
not an ordinance.
Yes.
This is really just for information.
That's right.
for us.
Unless
And
you
we
take
can.
unless you take action,
Right.
it will pass.
Okay, so we can be silent and it will be accepted
Yes.
by
And it
this
has,
body.
been published in accordance with the code for 30 days.
That's right.
And there were no comments, according to Cynthia Gaines, who keeps track of this for the ABC board. There were no public comments.
So if you have, if you have a desire to take a motion, but we don't have to.
No,
This
I
is
was
just for
gonna
information.
Thank the Office of Law for the information.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good info.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lyles. All right, going on to ordinances, 0922.
Madam Chair?
I'm sorry, yes.
I wondered if there, because given the wealth of new amendments we just received on 0922, is there any time sensitivity on this whole series of Stanton Center lease agreements? Because I don't know whether we'll be able to get to those today.
I think there is, because all of these organizations have been operating without a lease. So I think we can dispatch with these, at least these 4, in a rather quickly fashion.
I mean, we have some folks here to testify in 0922 with
I'm aware,
their own
that's why I'm
time
saying-
constraints. So pushing it back would potentially.
So
What I was prepared to do is to make a motion that the Rules Committee recommend favorably on all 4 of these leases.
Oh, yeah, I'd be amenable to that. I just need to get one thing out of the way on 2022, if that's all right.
then let's take that one out if you have some objection, and we can deal with 019, 020, and 023.
Less an objection and more a disclaimer, I guess would be the thing to phrase it, Mr. Laws. Okay, so I'll put the disclaimer out right now, and then we'll get the vote of the council. 02022, the Stanton Center lease with Luminous Health. Luminous Health is a member of the trade association that I work for. According to our city attorney, that non-direct relationship gives us enough unethical. It gives us. It is not unethical with that non-direct transfer, but he recommended I get you guys' feelings on this issue. If you believe that would be a potential conflict of interest or appear to be a conflict of interest, I can recuse myself from 2022 and leave the room. But wanted to get y'all's opinion on that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And let me ask Mr. Lyles, do you think there is a potential conflict if Alderman Schendelmeyer participates in the vote on this?
What the councilperson has told me about the relationship, I do not think that there is a direct conflict of interest in him voting on this particular lease.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, I agree with that.
Okay, so
Okay.
it looks like you're good.
Then I will second the Alderman Arnett's motion of favorable on 019, 020, 022, and 023.
Okay. And, you seconded it.
Yes.
Okay, we're good. Further discussion on the lease agreements? Hearing none, all in favor of a favorable recommendation for 019, 020, 022, and 023. Please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
All right.
thank you. So, I'm sorry, Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also, in the interest of time, what is the number? 028-22 is very timely. Briefly, that extension of time for metered spaces is currently underway, and this is the vehicle, no pun intended, to do that, to give the city manager direction to increase time. We promised Maryland Avenue that we would extend the time from 2 to 4 hours, and we need this legislation.
Alderwoman, I'm not clear. Can you,
She's,
you think it's time
It is time,
sensitive?
yeah.
So is this on the agenda for Monday night? Is that what
It will be if you take action on it today.
Okay. So would you like for us to move it up on the agenda? Is that what you're requesting?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll consult my colleagues.
I read it and think I have no problems with it.
That's pretty straightforward.
Okay. All right, then we'll take up 02822, vehicles and traffic, parking meters. I'll entertain a motion.
Move the committee make a favorable recommendation.
Second.
Okay, discussion. Alderwoman Tierney, do you want to tell us what this does or doesn't do?
What this does, as it reads, is it gives the city manager and the director of transportation the authority to increase meter duration, not meter pricing, but meter duration, which is imminent because we are doing that now, or will be doing that on specifically Maryland Avenue to assist the businesses during the garage reconstruction. We are making those meters from 2 hours to 4 hours. As you know, most meters downtown are limited to 2 hours. This was a compromise with Maryland Avenue because of the difficulty they are now facing, not only with Hillman down, but with the adjacent construction. So it's timely in the sense that we are waiting to do this.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Alderwoman Tierney? Alderman Chandler?
So basically, we're just letting him pay for 4 hours instead of stopping them at paying for 2 hours. So we're still getting money.
Absolutely.
All right, cool.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of a favorable recommendation for 02822, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
I move we adjourn.
No. We're going to have some fun.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is 0922, off-street parking requirements, food establishments, for the purpose of eliminating off-street parking requirements for bars, taverns, delicatessens, restaurants, and social clubs, and generally relating to off-street parking requirements.
All right.
Alderman Chandler?
Yes, Madam Chair, I thank you for your time. I am here to propose and introduce to the committee a simple, common-sense bill to reform our arbitrary parking requirements that were set with no real standards or understanding of what businesses need or the reality of the situation. The numbers that we came up with are frankly pulled out of thin air. They exist to justify their own existence, and parking requirements as a whole hurt our environment due to forcing the increase of impervious surfaces, causing more stormwater problems. They increase the amount of driving and traffic. They raise our carbon footprint by hurting density. They prevent the ability to have any kind of adequate transit network because a type of transit for buses is 16 units per acre. And then finally, we have seen throughout this pandemic just what a great positive community space we can create when we aren't forced to use dead chunks of asphalt for car storage. They are without a doubt one of the worst things that a city can implement. We are seeing many cities actually put in parking maximums, and the sky isn't falling. It's all been fine. And in fact, they've been able to increase their overall revenue. They've been able to increase their vitality. I had a fantastic conversation with the now mayor of a former city I lived in Auburn, Maine, where they entirely eliminated all parking requirements, and the city has been able to really significantly revitalize certain depressed areas. So it just makes sense. We would not be the first people to do this. We'd be around the middle of the pack, and I think it's time we join them.
Thank you. Well, there are several amendments. Alderman Arnett, I'll let you go first before we get into it.
Yeah, so I want to respond to, make sure I heard correctly what the Alderman said. One of them is, if I'm hearing it correctly, a higher order of use of land.
I'm sorry. Oh, no.
Than asphalt. And I understand that position. Another one is to affect the amount of automobile uses and reduce that, presumably by not providing parking and therefore discouraging people to drive to the food establishments.
If I could offer a clarification, it would simply not force businesses and builders to provide space from a code that does not really have a basis in scientific reality. And by allowing that choice, you increase or you decrease the amount of just unused impervious dead asphalt, which is directly tied to increases in driving. A really interesting study that's come out of called The Effects of Parking Provision on Automobile Abuse in Cities is studies of, this is actual real cities, because I know people roll their eyes whenever I go, oh, he's quoting another study. This is done in real cities, folks. This is real world data. It was done in Albany, Arlington, Berkeley, Cambridge, Lowell, New Haven, Silver Spring, and Somerville. And the studies of this showed that when cities increase parking spaces, they increase the amount of driving that occurs. The good example on the average that they found was when they increased from 0.2 parking spaces per person to 0.5, car use went up by 23%.
So to respond to that, first of all,
I'm sorry, Alderman, you had the floor.
it would be helpful to see all of these studies. They haven't been proffered in support of this legislation, but the converse of what I think you just said is that the studies in those cities is that by not providing parking, you're reducing private vehicle trips. I would submit that the net effect, when you actually look at the implementation of this legislation, is that it will increase automobile trips because you're increasing the amount of tables and seats that are available in these restaurants. And at the same time, you're taking away available parking, which means that people are going to have to cruise around in the neighborhood until they can find an available parking space. If it isn't close enough to the restaurant, they will cruise over to some alternative choice. So when you look at this legislation and you look at the number of all of the restaurants that are reported in the staff report, virtually all of the restaurants are located in shopping centers or strip malls, with very few exceptions. Two of them I can think of in Ward 2 are Flamont and Evelyn. Both of those restaurants have created outdoor dining spaces and have said to the alderwoman that they're going to retain their private parking because they think that's an enhancement to draw customers, that they'll be able to park nearby. So then examining the other restaurants that have private parking that could be impacted by this legislation, it would be Vin 909, the Boatyard, Forward Brewing, Adams Ribs if it moves to 4th Street, O'Leary's, and then 3 other restaurants which do not have off-street parking, Davis's, Lunas's, and Ruth Chris. Those restaurants would be affected by this, and the effect would be to increase the amount of new seating available by 30%, because the rule is you take your number of seats times 0.3, and that tells you the number of parking spaces. In actuality, you look at the number of parking spaces and figure out how many tables you can have. Those aren't the only things that control seats. There is the fire code, and there are health safety kinds of things. But the reality is that because this focuses narrowly on food establishments, not, as I believe I heard you proffer in earlier discussions, all establishments, that this has very specific limited impacts, and those impacts are, in fact, to increase automobile trips in the city. And so it seems that one of the stated objectives is actually contrary to what the result would be.
Well, what are you basing that statement on? Do you have hardcore study of amount of trips of vehicles taken based upon all of that?
Actually,
because unless we have these specific hardcore counts, we would be making policy based upon vibes, which is bad legislation. It would be done upon an arbitrary standard. In regards to the other parking requirements, all I can say is I'm working on it, man. I don't like any of these. There was a bigger sense of urgency for the restaurants because of how much outdoor dining was seen as a positive impact for our community. But I'm going to also be doing this for residential, for commercial, for everything. Parking requirements are without a doubt the biggest way for a city to strangle itself with bad land use.
So in response to your question, there is no study, but I think there should be. I asked notionally of people in planning what percent of private operated vehicle trips are related to food establishments as opposed to any other kind of trip, like to grocery stores, hardware, health providers, schools, jobs, those sorts of things. And the sense is that the food establishments generate relatively small. So in terms of achieving your broader goal, one of which I have some sympathy for, it seems to me that it would be more appropriate to have this more omnibus legislation, and then to do the very study that you asked for. I would say that we are waiting a mini study, which is the study that was called for in our 22, Resolution 2222, which I understand has been turned over to the planning staff, but they haven't finished their analysis, and that'll be forthcoming. And I think that study will be very enlightening in terms of the direct impact on the few establishments that really will be affected by this legislation, as opposed to the vast majority. So, like, for example, in your ward, Gumps has a special exception agreement on its parking, but really the parking requirements are for the shopping center itself. And if Gumps can make an arrangement for some parking spaces to be used for outdoor dining, and the shopping center can still provide the required parking, they're really unimpacted by this. And in fact, I would submit that none of the preponderance of restaurants outside of wards 1, 2, and 8 are in anything other than shopping centers and strip malls, and will not be impacted by this legislation. However, some restaurants will be, both positively and negatively, and some communities will be directly impacted because those restaurants are located in residential areas.
Thank you, Alderman.
There's actually a good immediate example of a restaurant in a strip mall type environment that is having an issue with parking requirements preventing the building from actually being used to the full effects, and it's the old Jerry's Subs and Pizza location. There was another pizzeria attempting to go into it, but due to the parking requirements not fulfilling the arbitrary numbers for the new Man and Market outdoor expansion, the retail that used to be in there, they can't fill that space based upon arbitrary code. What good is it doing having just this empty space because we can't come up with a better way to use the land? This is also to try and help potential for redevelopment when we start turning these strip malls into something better for our city's finances, better for our city's environment, better for our city's character overall, that we will be able to actually have something that doesn't end up being a giant crater of asphalt 2 or 3 times bigger than the building itself.
I understand your aversion to asphalt, but I challenge, you keep throwing out arbitrary.
It is.
I had a long discussion with former planning director John Harrison about this, and it turns out not only is it not arbitrary, it's also based in constitutional law, and it has to do with previous uses. It may be arcane, but it's not arbitrary, and there are actual parameters for making the determinations, and they have to do with the amount of space that can be occupied at any one time. That's why it's 30% of the seats, and with the assumption that multiple people will be coming in the same trip and using the single parking space, and also shared parking that is going on. So it's not arbitrary. And I haven't seen the study or analysis that you have to show that says that it is. It's an assertion, but I think we need to see those studies. Well, I think everybody on the council needs to see those studies.
Come prepared.
And I think we need to be able to evaluate it. In fact, I would say, rather than turning it over to me, I think you should be turning it over to the planning staff, whose job it is to make this evaluation.
Actually, I would like to ask Mr. Laplace and Mr. Lashinsky to come up and help us out here. There has, Mr. Lashinsky wrote a very detailed, I guess it was part of the staff report on this legislation. And so if you could come and give us, you know, it's clear that we have philosophical differences here. And I think I always look to our professional staff to give us their best professional judgment. Take the mic, if you don't mind, off of that table there. Mr. Tripp, I don't think you will need it. And Mr. Rice, there's another mic over on this side.
So we actually have prepared a handout. If this is
Okay.
summary of our recommendations in the legislation and the planning commission recommendations. They're in the documents already have, but we just thought we would highlight our recommendations.
So does this include the planning commission's recommendations?
Starting right there.
Okay.
First, yes, we just separated it into two.
Okay, would you make sure Ms. Green gets one, and Mr. Schenelmeyer, of course.
Got one in hand.
Thank you. Ms. Alderwoman Tierney could probably use one. She has some amendments, so.
So will you walk us through this?
Absolutely. Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning, here with Director Laplace.
Is your mic on, Mr. Lashinsky?
It is, yeah. And Planner Jackie Rouse and Economic Development Manager Stephen Rice. So what Ms. Rouse has handed you is a summary of the recommendations that came from the staff report on the legislation, as well as the Planning Commission's recommendations. I'll just walk through what those are, and we just noted whether those were accounted for in amendments yet, and most have not been. So first, from the planning staff, number one, we recommended that the legislation include a mechanism for regulating street parking in the Eastport area through a metered parking and residential parking permits north of 6th Street. That is not yet reflected in the legislation. Number two, the legislation should include a mechanism for committing new revenue from parking fees to specific improvements to the city's transit system and bike and pedestrian infrastructure that could have a measurable improvement on transportation mode share in the city. Amendment 1 partially addresses this by recommending a fee. Number 3, the legislation should exclude the waterfront maritime zones from its application. I believe Alderman Arnett's amendments do address this now. And those are the recommendations from the planning staff. The Planning Commission reiterated some of them. Number 1, all maritime zones should be exempted from the legislation. Number 2, the legislation should not be considered by the City Council until after the study ordered by R2222 is delivered to and considered by the Council. And I would concur with Alderman Arnett's comments that we have received a draft of that study. We're reviewing it, and we intend to submit it to the Council, I believe, next Friday. So. Number 3, a review of the shared parking law with a view to efficiently permit currently unused private off-street parking to be used as paid off-street shared parking should be promptly drafted and submitted. That's not reflected in the legislation yet. And then finally, from Planning Commission, the council should review regulations and standards addressing noise, hours, sanitation, ADA accessibility, building codes, fire codes, health codes, etc., and special exemption status, and change any as necessary in coordination with passage of this legislation. And that's not reflected yet. So those are the recommendations. I would reiterate that planning staff believes there's sensibility in this legislation. We do believe that business owners generally have the ability and knowledge and understanding of their clientele to manage the parking that they need, and doesn't have to be dictated in every instance. But there are specific places in the city, notably Ward 8, where there are conflicts that could be mitigated through some of these additional mechanisms. So that's essentially where we stand on this.
Mr. Lyshinsky, why do I have trouble saying your last name? Because I just want to call you by your first name.
It's common.
I'm sorry.
You're not the only one.
Did I understand you to say that the report is finished and will be presented to the council next Friday?
That's correct. And let me I don't really want to speak about what exactly the findings of the report are, but just to clarify the scope of the report, it focused on the 5 restaurants that currently are using their off-street parking for outdoor dining. So there were others during the pandemic that were doing that. Several of them are no longer doing that. VIN 909 is one example. So we are only focusing on the restaurants that continue to use their off-street parking for outdoor dining. And it's Forward Brewing, it's Bread and Butter Kitchen, it's Boatyard Bar and Grill in Eastport, and then it's Main and Market, and Grumps in the Bay Ridge, Hillsmere area. So the study looks at the experiences of those 5 establishments, how they've been impacted by being able to use the additional space for outdoor dining. It looks at the impacts to their businesses, both positive and negative. It looks at impacts to the neighborhoods around those establishments. It looks at impacts to the city in terms of costs or fees that might be associated with additional outdoor dining. And the consultant interviewed non-restaurant retail adjacent to these businesses to see what they thought. A survey was conducted of patrons to understand where they park and how they get to those establishments. So there's a great amount of information in that study. It's only about 30 pages long, but it's pretty robust. So I look forward to sharing it with you. Did I miss anything, Stephen? I don't know.
The only thing I would add, the study also looks at the impact on parking in the city, and associated with the outside dining with the pilot program. So it's the neighborhoods and specifically the parking situation in the neighborhood.
So it was pretty clear from the Planning Commission's recommendations and your own that the report will impact how we respond to this legislation.
Stephen's mic's not on.
Excuse me?
Stephen's mic's not on.
Mr. Rice, now you can turn your mic on. Am I correct in making that assumption?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Arnett?
I want to thank the planning staff for this brief, because we have a welter of paper here. And I think that today we have before this committee some things that address some of the steps. So as you pointed out, Mr. Lyshinsky, I have drafted some amendments to the code that would address the maritime part of the situation. Alderwoman Tierney and the mayor have something that addresses the fees. As Alderman Schoenemeyer brought to our attention, Professor Shoup, when he argued in terms of private off-street parking requirements, you shouldn't have them but you should charge for the economic value of the parking that is now displaced to public parking, and further, you should have a plan to return those receipts to the community, the fee receipts to the community directly affected. I think those are steps that still need to be fleshed out. So I do think this is a good step. I sent you, both Mike and Eric, and also the city manager, an email raising a question about what I think is a very legitimate point raised by Alderman Schoenemeyer, by Brooks, which is the highest use of land. And part of my question is it a continuum from no use to very intensive multi-purpose uses? Is it a dimensional thing that has a raise depending upon priorities that we might have, like affordable housing priorities, things of that nature? And in my view, I think we really need to have the answers to questions like that. And again, in having conversations with the planning staff, I view this current legislation as a piecemeal focus on food establishment, when we really ought to be focusing on parking requirements across the board. And that really is something that I think is a comp plan type question. And really, part of the problem I think I'm having with this legislation is it really is creating Sophie's choice in my ward. If, for example, this legislation were not passed, or if there was a carve-out in my ward, it would disadvantage only those restaurants in my ward, as opposed to all the other restaurants in the city and outside of the city. On the other hand, we are not doing anything, and I just was at Eastport Civic Association meeting last night where this was thoroughly discussed. We're not addressing the impact, and by the way, I talked about you after you left, Eric, positive. We're not addressing parts 2 and 3 of Professor Shoup, which is how do we compensate the now imposition on the public parking and the parking that's being shared by businesses, by residents, by visitors, and most important to me, by visiting boaters. That's what the Eastport Peninsula is all about. The races in the evening and the people who come to get on their boat and go cruising weekends or for longer. And those are really very, very troubling questions that I think need much more thorough analysis. It's not that I am unsympathetic to the fact that having empty parking lots for the majority of the time is probably not the best use. And I could think of a lot of immediate uses where you could have parking covered by a layer of retail, covered by a layer of 6 tiers of affordable housing, and that would be much more appealing and much better planning. But I don't think we're there, and I think that's what this document is indicating, is that there are still more things that need to be included in this legislation or in complementary legislation to figure out how we collect the fees, how we distribute the fees, and how we deal with some of these other things like shared parking and so forth. So with that ramble, it seems to me, Madam Chair, that we have a study forthcoming. We have several amendments to this legislation, some of which we just received today, and we have now some further recommendations from the planning staff. One of the reasons why I drafted, and I believe the council passed Resolution 2222, was to get us through the outdoor dining period for this season. And I think we have some time to step back, consider these recommendations from planning, consider these amendments, and to consider whether we don't want to take a bigger look at required parking on private space over the coming months and before we get back into the warm weather. So at a minimum, I would suggest that we need to schedule another meeting of this committee after we have some of these new materials and we have time to evaluate the amendments and the paper from the planning and zoning staff.
So your recommendation is that we postpone action until we get the appropriate report and have an opportunity to analyze the impact of it?
Yes, and to go over the recommendations from the planning staff about things that are not contained in this ordinance, which may need to be put into this ordinance, or could be a companion piece of legislation. I'm not sure what the right answer is at this point.
Excuse me, Alderman, I'm going to call on you in just one moment. I have a question about your recommendations and the terms "no action." Is that meaning no action in the legislation?
Right. That just means
so it's not
the legislation
included.
doesn't respond to that recommendation, nor does an amendment. Yeah.
We looked at the amendment, in putting this together, what we looked at was what amendments had already been introduced and were available on the city website.
Microphone.
And we do understand that.
Turn your mic on, please.
What we looked at was what amendments had already been introduced and reflected in Legistar, and actually the only, and although we do understand that Alderman Arnett has now drafted amendments that about the maritime, they were not at the point when we put this together earlier this week on the website. So when we say no action, what we're saying is there's not been any action on your part to address the recommendations. And you do have had all of these recommendations. They're in Legistar. They're part of the Planning Commission staff report and the Planning Commission findings. So we just thought to highlight this, because what we're really saying to you is that we didn't recommend unconditional, or nor did the Planning Commission, unconditional support of the legislation as drafted. We recommended it with some very specific conditions, and we thought that was important to refresh everybody's memory about that.
Well, I think we all appreciate having received this and your analysis. And we just got these amendments today because Granicus wasn't being friendly to us. And I think Alderwoman Tierney had one amendment that has been withdrawn. So things are constantly changing. So thank you. Alderman Schoenemeyer.
Well, what I could say for addressing some of these issues, Amendment 1 or Issue 1, like...
You're talking about the document that they just provided?
Yes, the document for planning and zoning of the Planning Commission's findings. For Issue 1 with residential parking permits and then paid parking for everything else, you put an amendment in, man, I'll co-sponsor it. I like that as a system. I'm gung-ho on it. I don't think we should force businesses to subsidize parking, but we should not be subsidizing parking for their people either. So yeah, I'm very in favor of it. Just like with the stuff off Maryland Avenue, they're paying to use our public space for storing their private vehicle. I'm all for it. It's a good idea. Let's do it everywhere. Amendment 2.
Madam Chair, may I make a quick comment about that?
Please.
I support, if an amendment could be made to address that, I just wanted to clarify that the parking district concept, regulated street park meters, residential parking permits, it's a very flexible idea. It's been adapted in lots of other communities. We have one in the downtown area. To the extent there are concerns that it would disadvantage people who, today Eastport is used as free parking for people who work downtown in restaurants. They walk over the bridge. It's used for sailing crew who come in and join races. Free on-street parking has benefited a lot of people. To the extent there are concerns about how those communities would be impacted, I think a parking district could be adapted to address those needs. You could have 4 hours of free parking instead of 2 hours, things like that. You know, the fees associated with metered parking could be adapted accordingly. So I just wanted to clarify that. I think it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
May I ask, have you looked at the option of creating a flexible plan? I mean, we've been talking for a while now about parking meters and parking districts, and so has there been, you know, it's kind of a option that will be a hybrid?
To my knowledge, there hasn't been a specific planning on that. It's been recommended in adopted studies. The 2016 Eastport Transportation Study is the primary source. You know, I would suggest engaging with SP Plus, the city's parking consultant, and looking at some of the options that, you know, may have worked in other places.
Well, we always talk about Annapolis being unique, and we truly are. What works in other places doesn't necessarily work here. I mean, we can liken it to other waterfront towns or other sailing towns or other historical towns, but we're very different. So,
if I could
Alderman, excuse me, Alderman. Alderman Arnett, and then Alderman Shedmeyer.
So there, with the previous city manager, there was a group in Ward 8 comprised of members from the Eastport Civic Association and the Eastport Business Association, and they've been looking at an array of options. Parking districts is one option. Parking zones is another. Parking zone is something that the Director of Public Works, the mayor, and the alderperson from the ward can establish essentially by fiat. Parking district, much more complicated process that's called for in Title 21. It goes through a petition to the Board of Transportation, then to the Transportation Committee, to legislation, to the council, and that's a much more permanent kind of structure. It isn't particularly flexible. So there is thinking that has gone into this, and one of the reasons why that has been going on is, as you said, and as our colleague Alderwoman Pendle Charles often says to us, not all wards are the same. Alderwoman Tierney and I had a conversation this morning about parking in Ward 1 for restaurants versus Ward 2 versus Ward 8, and there really are differences, and those are the kinds of things that I think Professor Shoup was pointing to. You look at the particular situations, you look at the impacts of it. Now, I will say, in thinking about a parking zone in Ward 8, one of my worries, it could take care of resident concerns and needs, but my worry is what it will do potentially to businesses. And that's one of the things I hope Mary Burkholder looked at in the study, is if we have these restrictive parking requirements. I will just add one other personal note. When I was racing on Wednesday night, it was usually 4 hours of getting to the boat, prepping it, doing the race, and then 2 hours at least at Davis's. So, you know, that would be a 6-hour free parking kind of thing. Now I suspect a lot of the racers are going to Forward Brewing because Cam is also a racer and has compatriots that want to come and enjoy something there. But so this isn't simple, and it does vary across the city. I think most wards won't notice the impact of this legislation. Some will notice it a little bit, and some will notice it a lot. And that's where I think we need some time to think things through, see the study, talk about how we follow up on this 2-page document from planning. And I'm more than willing to meet more frequently than our regular cycle if need be, because I think this is a very important issue, and we shouldn't drag our feet. It seems like there might be a lot of time until the next outdoor dining season, but the reality is it's not. There's not a lot of time.
Madam Chair.
And so we do have to stay on top of this.
Okay, I'm going to call on Alderman Schneidermeyer and then Alderwoman Kieran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, in regards to Annapolis as a special and unique place, yes, absolutely. We are so special and unique.
Without
But
being
there are
derogatory.
certain fundamental things that are true no matter the place you are in. Things that hold true in Arlington, Des Moines, Montreal, Heidelberg, Pyongyang, pick a place. These things seem to be kind of recurring with true. You get what you invite. You have more things that invite more cars, like wider roads, more parking spaces, you get more cars. That's been a constant everywhere it's been studied. So yes, we're unique, but we also have some commonalities that are universal laws. Second, I was gonna go down for some of the other issues brought up by the Planning Commission's stuff, if that's all right.
Sure.
Number 2, with the fee.
Are you in this document?
Yeah, back on
Okay.
Planning Commission recommendations. Number 2, with the fees, fine. We got to get funding for transit. I get it. Going to complain about it, but I get it. Number 3, I'm not going to blow up the bill over it, but we be up front here. Everybody's defense of it has been, oh, come on, man, we just did this with the parking requirements for maritime zoning. I know. Eric's smiling because I talked to him about this. But if that's our only defense and we're trying to use what is essentially the development purpose of mutually assured destruction to stop restaurants from coming into this, that's silly to me. We could have just gone no restaurants. What again I will say is I'm going to be doing this for the other commercial properties within the year to just even out the playing field. I fundamentally think parking requirements are bad for cities, and I'm going to do it. But just hiding behind codes and weird things here and there is really complicated land. Yeah, and I think Euclidean zoning is bad.
When you say number 3, that's shared parking.
Oh, number 3 was front page still.
Front page. There's 3 and then the.
Yeah. 1, the Planning Commission recommended the following conditions. So bottom of page 1, number 1, we just covered that. It's kind of the same from 3. The study, as long as we're not waiting until next month when we could have a tail end of October and early part of November missing out on parking, like, okay, if we meet again this month, that's fine. I'm going to probably paraphrase the study when I say some people are inconvenienced and annoyed, some people love it, everything's fine. Shared parking law, I love shared parking. I think the more flexibility we do it, but I'm going for just outright elimination everywhere, which would let more people use it. And number 4, with ADA requirements, actually, I'm going to say parking requirements hurt mobility for folks with disabilities by making walking just such a fundamentally uncomfortable thing for everybody that if you're not a young, fit guy like me, you can't walk across that 1.5 miles now to get to someplace because we've spread everything out through parking requirements. The neighborhood where I saw the most people with disabilities with the most mobile, carefree attitude was in Verdun in Montreal, where they closed off the streets entirely to cars. And people were just able to go down wide streets that had been reclaimed for community and for space. And this is something that, like, the AARP is in agreement as well with their 15-minute neighborhoods. Parking requirements make those impossible to have. And yes, AARP Maryland as well. It's not Annapolis, but it's our local AARP branch. They've come out supportive for eliminating parking requirements and things on that nature and pretty much everything.
Brooks, can I make a request? You assert these things. That's not common or shared knowledge amongst us, and we are the policymakers. So when you assert ADA is saying something or other, we need to be able to see it for ourselves. We don't have these things, and it makes it impossible for us to make shared policy decisions when you're operating by assertion of things that we haven't seen.
That's why I cite them.
So what?
So I cite the groups and the studies and the sources. If we are curious enough to go out and learn the knowledge, we can do so. I don't just say the things without backing it up.
Okay, I think we're pretty clear on the approaches that we're looking at.
All right, I'll yield my time now.
So I'm going to ask Alderwoman Tierney. You wanted to chime in, but I have a question about amendments because I think I heard a consensus on planning another meeting of the Rules Committee to address this legislation. Do you feel your amendments would survive the test of time, or should we act on your amendments?
Thank you so much.
Even though we don't have to take a position on the entire legislation, but we can address your amendments.
Thank you for that question. I was looking in Robert's rules to see if there was any definition of what I was going to ask. If I may. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the way you look at it, this legislation has become conflated in a serious way with outside dining. You know, we have received 90 or so pieces of paper, testimony saying yay to outside dining against this legislation. We have put ourselves in a conundrum. Here are the givens. Right now, downtown, we have leases going out. Some are signed, some are executed for outside dining in public spaces. And those restaurants are paying. They're paying the city fee, and the logic there is that they're taking up parking spaces and there's some capital expenses. Presently, as we speak, we have restaurants that are using their private parking lots basically at no cost. So, this amendment was timely to address an existing situation.
May I ask, not to interrupt you, but which amendment? Because
it would be amendment number 1.
Buckley, Tierney, Savage.
Right.
Okay.
So I listened, and the mayor is sponsoring because it was his, he's not here to speak for himself, but it was his objective to address outside dining. And I think the thought was that if we waive parking requirements, they can use those parking spaces for outside dining. As simple as that. Well, it's not that simple. We're doing a study to evaluate all parking situations, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know when we'll figure that all out. So what I'm asking your expertise, I wonder if my amendment, and I'll tell you what amendment number 1 does, Madam Chair, if I may. I know you didn't move it to discuss, but I think we're being informal right now. What my amendment 1 proposes to do very simply is on the logic that we have parking requirements, if we waive those parking requirements, if the restaurant chooses to waive those parking requirements, they respectfully pay a fee in lieu of. It simply introduces a fee in lieu of, similar to what we have in downtown, et cetera, for restaurants. And it follows the Planning Commission's objective to take that fee and put it in our transportation fund. And let me just tell you what the logic there is. A restaurant has a provision upon approval to provide parking spaces. We waive that. Therefore, logically, that burden of parking that they were supposed to provide is now on the public streets. They were supposed to provide 10 spaces. They don't provide those 10 spaces. Theoretically, those 10 spaces are going to be used up in the street somewhere. That's the logic in this. So what is that fee? And then so I think I can address this independently, maybe as a ordinance or a resolution. Cynthia and I were talking about this. So it's there when we figure out what we're going to do with all the rest of the parking situation. I don't know. My question is, do you think we can do both? Do you think we can address outside dining and waiving parking citywide in the same legislation? If not, I would pull my amendment out, which basically addresses outside dining, as a separate ordinance. I seek advice.
I mean,
I don't know. I thought you had withdrawn one of your amendments.
What we did, Cynthia and I cleaned up everything. I think these amendments, there were some amendments, it doesn't matter. Amendment 1 right now is.
This is the one with the blue printing on it?
Yeah, the paper copy. Yeah,
And this speaks to the fee in lieu of, which is the
Correct.
first part. There's several parts to this one, right?
well, you had to do it in separate code sections. So you basically introduce the fee in lieu of in each respective code section. One for, for the different categories. And that's basically what it does. And per Planning Commission recommendations, it deposits that fee into the transportation fund.
So just to clarify, because we worked with Alderman Tierney on her amendments, you can't charge a fee if you eliminate the parking requirements, as was proposed in the original legislation, then you can't charge a fee if you have no parking requirement. So in order to have a system where you would be paying the fee in lieu, you really have to put all the parking requirements back in the legislation and then provide through, I think was set up through a footnote 7, that it says that you can apply for a waiver to the parking requirements and pay the fee in lieu instead. So that's kind of the theory behind how all of that works.
So in the body of the amendment, you can see where I basically add back the parking.
You're talking about the footnote?
Well, just to, for example, if you go to page...
I thought you were referring to the footnote that Ms. Rouse just mentioned.
Well, page 3 is the first one, bars and taverns, so I'm adding back in the 30% requirement. And this is, and I understand Brooks is probably very upset about this, but this is reality. I mean, we have limited real estate, and we really have to optimize the use of these, of this real estate. We don't have a situation back in the 70s or 80s, or that wonderful time of zoning when we introduced these sea of parking lot for like the Giant and the Bay Ridge Shopping Center. So I really applaud his cause, but we're really dealing with an existing situation of restaurants and their parking spaces, and what is the best use for those parking spaces. And right now, it seems like the market is outside dining. And we want to support our transportation, so if we put this money into our transportation fund, it would help us bus people around. And so it in your interest, in Alderman Schottenmeyer's interest, I believe it optimizes the use of this asphalt for a restaurant by using it for outside dining. Outside dining is super successful, but we have to implement some kind of a fee.
Thank you. I think Mr. Lyles wanted to weigh in, if you'll give him a mic.
Don't tell me it's all illegal.
We in the Office of Law, me specifically, have been a little concerned about the quote-unquote amendments. It appears that these amendments are changing the structure, content, fabric, intent, and meaning of the basic bill. And to me, they are new things and not amendments.
Significant changes.
Yes, they are not amendments.
Or
they're even more than substantive. If the bill says the sun is yellow and you produce a bill that says the sun is black, that's not an amendment. That's a opposite thing. And that's what these amendments are doing. They're changing the basic function of the title, even the title, which is eliminate off-street parking. If you want to put parking back in, that's another bill in my view. And I think it behooves the council to separate these competing bills into actual pieces of legislation that are not called amendments, so that you don't get bogged down in changing the structure of the basic bill under the guise it's an amendment. It's really a new thing. And it would be easier to gather the information, because now you would have staff directed at not an amendment, which this first thing is going to happen subject to these little changes. No, this first thing is not going to happen. Alderman Tierney's legislative piece does away with the elimination of off-street parking. It does away with it and creates something new. Parking remains subject to these waivers, or the ability of the department to waive based on a fee being paid. So in my view, the amendments need to be really scrubbed to determine whether or not they're so substantive that they're new bills. And if they are new bills, they need to be presented as new bills.
So let me be clear. If the amendment speaks to a fee in lieu of, which is what Alderwoman Tierney is proposing, then you're saying that that's a significant change from the legislation as proposed.
It is not an amendment. It is a new thing. It is a new proposal, in my view.
So if we agreed that we would prefer to do it as the Alderwoman proposed, then in essence, we would have to kill this legislation.
Correct.
And
introduce a new bill.
Introduce a new bill.
With a new regime.
Okay, did all of the amendments meet that same test? Or, I mean, they all came through the law department.
In my view, they all disagreed with the basic premise of eliminating off-street parking for food establishments, and they tried to substantively change it. Alderman Arnett's had a slight variation in that we don't want to eliminate it everywhere for food except in maritime, which to me, it's up to the council to determine whether that's substantive enough. I didn't think it was that substantive, but again, you have to think about the extent and the nature of maritime zones. And I don't know enough about the square acreage of maritime zones to determine whether it's substantive. For instance, if maritime zones is 90% of what you're talking about with respect to restaurants, that would be a substantive change, because then you're taking the elimination of off-street parking and making it a nullity, basically, because 90% of the area you're talking about is maritime. But I don't know enough about it. Planning would have to say. So I didn't opine on that one, but I didn't think it was as substantive. But we need more information about the area we're talking about.
So would it be, and I'm asking the committee, to ask the law department to scrub these amendments and to see which are applicable without it being a substantial change? I mean, you've already spoken to Alderwoman Tierney.
Just the two that I remember. Cynthia has done most of the work, and I've just kind of reviewed what she gave. We'd have to go back and talk about it. But I wanted to put that out there so the committee could look at these on its own and determine whether that they were substantive enough. It's just kind of a concern we had, because we found ourselves reworking amendments, reworking amendments instead of small amendments or non-substantive amendments. They were bigger and bigger.
Well, and that's why I'm asking if we can count on the law department to help us with what should be and could be.
We can make a determination of what we have in front of us, whether or not we think they're substantive and whether they should be new bills. I think we can do that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you. I agree with the city attorney. It's a real struggle because we're trying to do too much in this piece of legislation. So I thank him for that advice, and that's what Cynthia recommended. In fact, she thought I should just draft up my own ordinance addressing the fee in lieu of. But then that begs the question, what do we do with 09-22?
Vote on it.
May I suggest then that we have that as an established baseline of what parking we are requiring after we all collectively review the study. I'm just suggesting we could look at this legislation and look at the tables and say, yeah, we can reduce it to 15 or this and that, and then I'll have a standalone, whatever it is, ordinance or resolution, it'd be both because I'm introducing a fee to address the outside dining. But we have to come to some consensus based on that study of what kind of parking we're going to require from these restaurants.
Alderman Jannemeyer.
Thank you. So first off, There is correlation between this and outdoor dining. The staff report itself says it. And I think we all kind of tried to overcomplicate this. It's a very simple, do what you want with the land you own. With the restaurants holding space on public, having outdoor dining on public spaces, of course they need to pay a fee. It's on public spaces. It's ours. They're using it as a private entity. They should pay us. On someone else's own land, there is a fundamental problem with the government going, you must do it for this one type of thing. And by the way, the one type of thing is the storage of personal automobiles, the #1 driver of climate change. So I feel like this environmentally friendly city should be a little more supportive of this. But I also want to point out by taking away this one space here and for outdoor dining, opening it up, you then are going to be adding one extra space onto the street. The data doesn't back that up from personal anecdotal space. So if this is an anecdote, we can't take that in too much weight. But again, I've pointed out many studies. I've cited many studies for folks to actually look at. I was out at Forward last night. Do you know how many on-street parking spaces I took up? 0. I rode the bike because I'm just saying. So we have one example. There are other people that came out to the event as well that walked, that rode bikes. If we keep prioritizing the status quo of going, the car is the most important thing to our city, which we keep doing by maintaining this status quo, we are going to not do our part of making the city a better place. We are failing our obligations to address climate change. We are failing our obligations to the comp plan that was introduced back in 2010, where we said we were going to prioritize other methods of transportation. We are failing our businesses by not allowing them to innovate, by shackling them with an arbitrary number of off-street car storage spots. We cannot keep going. The convenience to put your car directly in front of your final destination as the #1 goal of this city.
Alderman, I think we get your point. And I think I have heard an interest in postponing from both committee members, actually. And we've asked the law department to come back with some, is that a hand up for yes or hand up for no? Yeah. Okay, all right, sounds good. We have the planning commission or the planning department and their recommendations. Please hang in with us. I suspect there are folks who came to speak on this subject. You may speak now if you'd like, or you may hold your testimony because we are going to have another meeting, or you may send us your testimony in writing. Whatever is your pleasure. You've been sitting here for almost 2 hours, so. Sir, if you'd like to speak, you may go to the mic at this point. And please give us your name and your address.
My name is Bill Sweetser. Can you hear me all right? And I live at 5 Shipwright Harbor in Annapolis. And I'm an avid boater. And I also believe that we do have a problem with parking, with traffic in Annapolis. The first thing I just wanted to mention is that being an avid boater, and from what I've read, and I've studied just about all the documents that we've been discussing within the last week or so, I really want to support Alderman Arnett's concept, that this is not the right thing for the maritime industries. What I see, and I was a very active supporter of the Maritime Task Force, which this council passed, I believe, in November of last year. This legislation started soon after that. And I see conflict, and I hear it today, conflicts between the objectives of the Maritime Task Force and the objectives of the people here. It needs time to be worked out. It can be worked out, but it's almost like powerful forces. This is a very powerful bill. Powerful forces, of course, Maritime Task Force, look at the effort and money and thinking and all the committee work. I watched a lot of it on TV, all the committee work that it took to put that together, and they're bumping towards one another now. I think it's workable, but I think it can't be worked without more thought, more study, more talking. I think what we heard from Planning Commission today was really, really important. I agree with them. Their number one contingency, they're saying this should not proceed, in their opinion, unless all maritime zones are exempted from this legislation. That hit me before I even read the Planning Commission report. So I'm saying I'm an advocate of Maritime Task Force. I think that effort has done more for the marine industry in this town and will do more as the years go by than any other initiative I've seen in my 22 or 3 years that I've lived here. And I support it. I think it's going to be the right thing to do. But if it gets watered down with things like this pushing against it, where compromises may have to be made, it's going to lose some of its impact. When I look at Annapolis, I think of two things. I think of when I first drove here and I saw a sign, Sailing Capital of the United States or America, I said, this is a town for me. We can still say that. We can also, though, say we've got the Naval Academy here. I see two things in Annapolis that are the heart and soul of Annapolis, our sailing industry and the Naval Academy. We need to keep them alive and well. So on that note, I will say, I think we need more work to do. I'll move over to what I hear here and what I felt as I read through the documents. We need more time to work this out. I'm also a member of WARA, and you may know Rick Lober, who is the president of the Ward 1 Resident Association. And last night, this kind of caught him by surprise, this meeting. He wasn't ready for it. He did say he'd like to be here, but he couldn't be here, and he asked me to read an email from Rick to me, dated yesterday at 8:25 p.m. I don't see a place to submit public testimony, but I can offer the following. By the way, is there a way for him to have presented this email at 8 o'clock last night?
Well, you could give it to us and we could put it into the notes from the meeting.
May I distribute this now then?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So you just pass it. Mr. Tripp, would you pass that over to us, please?
Basically,
is his name attached and address so we'll know the source?
I would have to, I don't know his address. He lives near me.
We know, yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. I just wanted it attached so that
thank you for accepting that. But when I think of the sailing industry, a lot of my very good friends are in the sailing industry. A lot of them work hard, and they don't want to see anything endangering the industry. We've seen a great rise in the number of boats around on the creek and on the water in the harbor because for some reason people bought an awful lot of boats after the COVID, maybe just before and after. That may not last. We're going to see some tough economic times with the fight against inflation. And we need to do everything possible to keep this industry alive. When you lose a good rigger for the shrouds on a sailboat and he goes into some other business, it takes a long time to retrain people for those positions. So I would say I'm in a way excited what I'm hearing today because it's progress, but I really believe we should not discuss this legislation in Monday's meeting. It should be put out into the future. I know somebody said try to do it this month. I don't think we should try to do it too soon. It's complicated. I don't know that many communities have addressed anything this complicated, where they have this key industry like maritime, and they also have a key need to do something about parking on our streets.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
It's probably both barriers.
Hi, my name is Jackie Wells. I live at 201 Severn Avenue in Annapolis in Eastport. I am on the board of the Eastport Civic Association, and I lead the legislative regulatory efforts for the ECA. In the interest of time, I'll say that we support all the recommendations that were made by the planning staff. We also support the recommendations that were made by the Planning Commission. We submitted substantive testimony to the Planning Commission, and we will submit substantive testimony to this committee and also to City Council, but mainly we do support a postponement of this for further consideration because we too would like to see the study that the city commissioned and paid for with the idea that you take into consideration that information before making any determination on 0922. As well, there are amendments being proposed to outdoor dining code separately, not amendments to 0922, that will just address outdoor dining to bring it more in line with what exists for rooftop dining. We think those should be in place before 0922 is enacted, if it is going to be enacted. So again, in the interest of time, I'll reserve our more substantive comments in writing to you all, both at a next committee meeting and then also at City Council.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Thank you very much. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to postpone action on 0922.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Not for me.
I will second it. Further discussion?
We don't need to keep kicking the can down the road for things we know are fine.
Thank you, Alderman. I'll call the question. All in favor of postponing action on 0922, please say aye. 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 Opposed?
No.
Thank you. All right, so,
Madam Chair, could I?
yes, Alderman.
For future meetings and discussions, when data are referred to that make some point, can we share that data with the council? It is not very helpful to have assertions on data that we haven't had a chance to see or evaluate for ourselves.
I think that's a good practice for everything that we do. All right. Have we, I think that exhausts our agenda in 2 hours flat. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Actually read it because I've been sleeping.